Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. What should be the priority of a fentanyl czar? And who could fill that role? Ottawa will create the new role as part of its agreement with Donald Trump to stave off tariffs. We'll talk to Vancouver Sun crime reporter Kim Bolan. Plus, BC will fast-track 18 resource projects to reduce trade reliance on the U.S. They include hydro, wind, LNG, and mining. Some climate activists are concerned. And we're asking you, is the climate issue taking a back seat in dealing with the United States? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. As you've been hearing, the implementation of tariffs on Canadian imports to the United States has been paused as of Monday when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau promised President Donald Trump the formation of a fentanyl czar to improve Canadian border security. Public Safety Minister David McGuinty spoke of the new appointment as being a multi-pronged approach with jurisdictional restrictions.
For example, the new fentanyl czar is going to be involved in pulling together, obviously, our law enforcement, obviously, our local law enforcement, our attorneys general, our provincial counterparts, Health Canada's new laboratory systems that are being stood up so we can track and trace the source of precursors coming from different parts of the world that are being used to make the fentanyl. It involves our global affairs folks because it obviously involves international relationships with China, with Mexico, and beyond. So that fentanyl czar role will be involved in helping to pull all of this together so we can get over any hurdles and execute on a plan that involves minimizing, if not eliminating, fentanyl.
That was Public Safety Minister David McGuinty in Ottawa on Tuesday. You can call us now. Do you think we need a fentanyl czar? And what would be the priority? And who do you think should fill that role? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. Joining me now is longtime Vancouver Sun crime reporter Kim Bolan. Hi, Kim. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Michelle.
Amid all of this, this trade back and forth and tariff back and forth with the U.S. president, we've been hearing the fact check that federal statistics show U.S. border authorities seized 21,889 pounds of fentanyl in 2024. Of that amount, 43 pounds were seized at the Canadian border, which is about 2% compared with Mexico. So do we need this step of appointing a fentanyl czar?
Well, I don't think the issue is really whether we need a fentanyl czar per se. Certainly, we have a big problem in Canada with transnational organized crime. They're producing a lot of drugs here. Fentanyl, we know, because of all the super labs that have been uncovered over the last year, including the record-setting one that police raided in Falkland back in October.
Right.
So it's not so much the small amounts going across the border. No organized crime group makes fentanyl alone. They make methamphetamine, they make MDMA, they smuggle in cocaine, they smuggle in heroin. So it's a much broader problem than just this fewer than 20 kilograms that the U.S. border agents seized in 2024. I have to look back to the big series I did in the Vancouver Sun last year,
Yes.
reporting from several countries on, methamphetamine coming from Canada, wreaking havoc in places like Fiji, causing huge problems in Australia and New Zealand. So, it's too bad that it took these tariff threats to get us to look at this issue, but the issue existed before Donald Trump was elected.
So it goes beyond, as you said, that small amount that goes through the Canada-U.S. border and more about BC and Canada's role in overall that multinational problem of drug trafficking?
Yes, that's right. I mean, if you look at the statistic for 2023 and into 2024, we had 8 tons of methamphetamine seized leaving the Port of Vancouver. And, that was fortunately seized by excellent work by Canada Border Services Agency. However, we know that if that amount was seized, much more went through. And yet there was no call for, a strike force or a czar to be appointed in response to that, even though there's no demonstrable charges that have been laid in connection with that huge amount of methamphetamine. So, I think that this is good if we seriously look at the issues of transnational organized crime that have existed in Canada for some time now. However, if it's just going to be kind of lip service paid to appease the US government under Trump, I'm not sure it's going to make much of a difference on the Canadian side of the border.
To what extent do you think, or have you heard, that this may actually accomplish something? Well, you've been speaking with law enforcement, politicians, and academics. What are they telling you?
Well, again, they think that, the attention being paid and the resources being put in could be good as long as they also come with an assessment of what's going wrong in our judicial system when it comes to major cases targeting the highest levels of organized crime. We do not see a lot of prosecutions anywhere in Canada, maybe more in Quebec than elsewhere, of the highest levels of organized crime being held to account for things that are happening, whether it's, human smuggling, drug smuggling, money laundering, murder for hire. We're not seeing those kinds of prosecutions. Here in BC, we often have, young hitmen being prosecuted for, being hired to go kill someone on behalf of organized crime, but the people who order the hits are not prosecuted. I've written about that extensively. So this could be an opening to look at some of those bigger issues. But the experts are also telling me that we shouldn't just be looking at the border. Once the drugs get to the border, the highest level person you're going to arrest is a mule, a trucker, or someone who, for a small amount of money in proportion to what's being earned, has agreed to transport drugs across the border. So, you may get some arrests, you may stop a little bit of the product from getting in or out of the country, but you're not making a dent in terms of taking the profit out of organized crime at the top levels.
Now, you talk about the criminal justice system. This morning, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was here in Vancouver at the port and announced a proposal to amend the criminal code and sentences for what he called kingpin drug traffickers. Let's just hear what he had to say this morning.
That common sense Conservatives will bring mandatory prison sentences. There will be life sentences for anyone caught trafficking, producing, or exporting over 40 milligrams of fentanyl. 40 milligrams is enough to kill 20 people. Anyone who is involved in trafficking that amount of fentanyl will get a life sentence. We will lock them up and we will throw away the key. And 15 years for traffickers caught with between 20 milligrams and 40 milligrams will be the new mandatory sentence. The people we will lock away are not non-violent addicts. They are the victims. We will come to the rescue of victims and addicts. We will provide life-saving treatment.
That's Pierre Poilievre speaking this morning. So, Kim, what do you make of that changes, creating mandatory sentences when it comes to drug trafficking?
Well, unfortunately, I feel like it's political rhetoric, and I feel like all of these issues are generally related to this kind of rhetoric, unfortunately, regardless of which party is involved. Because, we've had mandatory minimum sentences before with regard to firearms in an attempt to deal with, gang violence, and they were struck down, by the Supreme Court of Canada. So mandatory minimum sentences are likely not going to withstand a constitutional challenge. And that's me and my very reporter lay opinion. So what we need are, better ways to investigate and prosecute the higher levels of organized crime. It probably means legislation similar to RICO legislation in the United States, where you can go after different elements within a criminal organization and make them accountable for their role in whatever the bigger conspiracy might be. So I don't see that as the answer. In fact, the criminal code already has some drug trafficking sentences that are actually life. I don't think people maybe understand that because those penalties are rarely, well, if ever, I don't think in my 40 years of reporting I've ever seen that kind of a penalty imposed for a trafficking or import case. So there's a lot of things that you just put them on the book, but they're not going to make any real substantial difference. I think we need, maybe a task force to look at what's not working within our judicial system from the ground up if we want to make real changes.
Before I let you go, in all of this, we keep hearing the call for port police. Where are we with that? Where is that discussion now?
Well, I think people want some kind of robust policing at the ports. But I don't think they want a 1997 model of, the equivalent of a small municipal force, like sitting there on the docks. They do want a presence on the docks, but they also want it to be, a more complex agency that's able to deal with, some of these bigger investigations, right? Because, the ports are generally automated. Certainly, if you have a presence on the docks, you're going to get intelligence about who might be involved in, they call them trusted insiders that are facilitating the movement of drugs in containers, hoping to evade any kind of scrutiny from border service agents. So, something has to change on the docks. But again, I don't think we have the model right now of how it would work. And that's something that should be looked at and implemented for sure.
It's really, really good to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks again for having me.
That's Kim Bolan, Vancouver Sun crime reporter. 12:17 now. We are asking you, what do you think should be job number one for a fentanyl czar that will be appointed as part of this agreement with Donald Trump in an attempt to stave off tariffs? There's now a pause on those 25% tariffs. What do you think should be their job one? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Maya is joining us now from Vancouver. Hi, Maya. Hi there, Maya. Can you hear me?
Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yes, thanks for calling. What do you think of this fentanyl czar and what they need to do?
Okay, so the title is ridiculous. We need, in general, control over our boards and ports, especially, because we don't know what's coming in these containers. If it takes to have a czar, the title is not going to solve the problem. I think we need to change. I don't know how. Of course, we need funding, right? So they have to be approved, these funds. And then we need a reasonable reform. How we're going to protect our streets of the fentanyl and all these drugs. I have a 10-year-old, and I'm worried about. She's going to go to high school, and we hear these stories. So, as a mother, I would put my vote to the party that is going to really do it, not just say it, just do it, and do it reasonably and smartly. And I think the Canadians are on board for that. So. I know the previous your guest says it's a political issue. It's not. And now we have to be smart and listen which party is going to give the most comprehensive and realistic plan and get on to it, because we've been hearing this for many, many years. As far as I remember, 20 years about this drug crisis, and nothing has been done. So enough is enough. We have to start from the top and allocate money, funds, and tracking devices if we have to put in the containers, whatever it takes. We need to know what's coming to our country.
Some kind of system to screen what's coming in the containers. 2016 was when the crisis was declared, the public health crisis.
I don't know if the title is going to help, but whatever you call it, but somebody has to be accountable and, keep track and just propose comprehensive reform in our boards and ports.
Maya, great to hear from you. Thank you so much for calling. Lisa is next in Victoria now. What are your thoughts, Lisa, on a fentanyl czar?
Well, my thoughts for a while have been that we really need more preventative measures happening in our community and all communities, especially for people who are recreational drug users and they don't have any tolerance to fentanyl. And I'd like to see a fentanyl czar working on some preventative and proactive measures, especially, like I said, for recreational drug users, because those are the people who get a little bit of fentanyl in the cocaine that they've bought, or a little bit in ketamine, and they die. And I have some people who are very close to me who have passed away, and it's just really sad. So I'd like to see more preventative measures happening like that. I'd like to see the people who are lacing recreational drugs. I'd like to see harder measures taken against them, because as far as I'm concerned, they're murderers. They've murdered those beautiful young people I know who have passed away.
I'm sorry.
And another issue is there are people who are actually addicted to the fentanyl itself, and they have a high tolerance. And so a lot of the addicts, whether they're on the street or not on the street, they need their fentanyl, and that's what they're addicted to. So I'm wondering how that will work.
Yeah, Lisa, thanks for bringing that up. When you talk about comprehensive, does that also include then those preventative measures? And we actually on CBC heard from Cora DeBeck, who's a research scientist with the BC Centre on Substance Use, also professor at SFU's School of Public Policy. And she says tools like drug checking, like you suggested, Lisa, supervised consumption sites, naloxone are evidence-based. And she said that she is skeptical that just focusing on the border will accomplish much to reduce fentanyl. She spoke with CBC's Gloria Makarenko about her concerns.
What it is accomplishing is something that is out of my sphere of expertise, which is sort of an international relations, dealing with a very complex situation down south. In terms of from an evidence-based perspective of what trying to reduce or cut down or eliminate fentanyl crossing our borders, my prediction based on research and evidence is that it will be a absolute failure. There are drugs in prisons. There always have been. There always will be. The idea that we can stop the flow of these drugs in the face of the kind of innovation that organized crime and drug cartels have is unrealistic. And frankly, one of the reasons we have fentanyl in our drug supply is because we have not regulated it and we have not put any safety protections within it. And it's much easier for organized crime to produce fentanyl instead of heroin and to transport and traffic fentanyl instead of heroin. So I'm not optimistic about any kind of big gains in stopping the flow of fentanyl across borders. And I think we need to look at other much more evidence-based approaches.
That's Cora DeBeck, a research scientist with the BC Centre on Substance Use, professor at Simon Fraser University's School of Public Policy. About 23 minutes past the hour now. You're with BC Today here on CBC, and we are asking you, in light of the appointment of a fentanyl czar that Ottawa has committed to as part of its deal and agreement with U.S. President Donald Trump to hold off on tariffs to try and appease those concerns around the border. We're asking you, what should be the number one job for a fentanyl czar? Do we need one? And Joanne emailed us. The naming of this position is for Donald Trump. The game changer for this problem is identifying organized crime and cartels as terrorist groups. Hopefully, this changes the catch and release for criminal behavior. Randy writes, the unintended consequence of this move is a positive. This move will add a much needed focus to the fentanyl scourge and expedite the process. It is unintended because the need was there prior, and the proof of efficacy would have been in the deterrent factor created by the justice system. Now let's talk about illegal American guns coming to Canada. Maureen writes, to use an analogy my late mother would have used, when Donald Trump cracks the whip, Canada jumps and asks how high on the way up. I feel like we are dancing to his music, and I don't like it. We have other issues we should be focusing on, which are guaranteed to get worse in light of the president's actions during the last 2 weeks. And Sheila writes, I know this isn't your question, but I'm much more interested in why people use drugs. If we address that question, the market would dry up. Canadians should remember how prohibition worked or didn't and look at how that is evolving. Thanks so much for your emails. bctoday@cbc.ca again is our address. And let's go back to the phone lines now. Harry is calling from Richmond. Harry, what are your thoughts on a fentanyl czar and what they need to do?
Well, first of all, for the fentanyl czar, that is, the name itself is just stupid. But anyway, whoever takes the job, they should reinstate the dock police, or whatever the proper name is.
At the ports, okay, yeah.
Yeah, port police. And they should also, like I was mentioning to the person I was talking to, that I don't know why they don't do it here in Canada, but when the containers go over to the U.S., they have X-ray machines that scans them at the borders to see what's inside. Why can't we have something like that for containers going out of Canada, going to the U.S. or whatever? When the containers, when they leave the shipyards, how hard is it to just scan what's in there before they leave the docks?
Okay. So for you, the fentanyl czar, or whatever you want to call it, that would be a priority, is addressing the ports and screening at the ports.
Yeah, because if they're saying that fentanyl's, all that it is being made in Canada, some of the stuff, but obviously it is. But for the stuff that's coming from overseas or anything, that'd be one way to deal with it. But the stuff that's made in Canada, obviously it's a lot harder. And the way it's made, it's like all over the counter stuff that you can just buy from different locations. So it's like you can't really track
the precursor
compound.
Yeah, the precursors, right? Yeah. Harry, thank you very much for the call from Richmond and echoing the call for Port Police. Tina writes us, I think having someone head an active movement to curtail the import and export of fentanyl and other associated products is important. But can we please call them something different than a czar? That term is really getting a lot of response and reaction. That is Trump's language, and using it just validates their ultra-right-wing politics. Fentanyl reduction captain would be even better. Ambrose writes, to the question of who could fill the role of a fentanyl czar or fentanyl reduction captain, as suggested just now by Tina, Dana Larson. He can ensure safe supply and spectrometer testing, and more pillars. More pillars are needed within harm reduction. So talking about that angle to this story as well, harm reduction. Thank you very much for all of your emails. Again, you can weigh in. Just let us know what you think of a fentanyl czar. What do you think of the title, but also what should be the job one, the priority for someone who fills that role. You can email us bctoday@cbc.ca. It's just about 12:28 now. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Now, yesterday on the show with my friend Dan Burrett, guest hosting, we asked you what you thought of the movement to buy Canadian in the face of these threatened tariffs. Jean writes from Vancouver, I long ago made the decision not to buy American or travel to the U.S. ever since Trump was elected in 2016. However, Canada does not exist in a vacuum, and I'm not averse to buying from other countries or visiting other countries. My qualm is solely that Americans have made a democratic decision to elect him, and thus in general, I've chosen not to support Americans. Gail writes from Delta, we need to break down interprovincial preferences. And here's one from Jane in Lillooet. Can't afford Canadian-produced stuff? Maybe go back and do a bit more math. Factor in single-payer health care for everyone, not losing your home because of medical bills, old age pension, not tied to work history, plus GIS top-up. Your apples from BC and potatoes from Pemberton are going to look a lot more affordable if you figure out the true price. And Cassidy writes, it is worth remembering that the reason U.S. produce and other products are cheap is because they use low-wage, undocumented migrants. Those employees have stopped showing up for work, and many U.S. citizens refuse to do the work for the low wages. Those cheap prices will either go up or the fruits and veggies will rot on the farms as they go unpicked. And here's one from Steve in Campbell River. The Donald Trump tariffs have nothing to do with tariffs and everything to do with border security. All Trump wants is an international coordinated response to what China is doing to North America and the rest of the world. Thanks so much for all of your emails. Again, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. This is BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thank you so much for joining us on Radio 1, on CBC Television, and live streaming as well on the CBC News app. And you can watch us on YouTube. Just search for CBC British Columbia. And coming up in our next half hour, we are going to talk about another response to the threat of tariffs. And this is looking to boost BC's economy. And Premier David Eby says he's going to fast track, or the province will fast track, more than a dozen resource projects in order to do so. Now, that is raising concern among some climate activists. And we're going to hear from an environmental reporter on how common this is right now and what the concerns do entail. So we're going to take your calls and speak in just a moment with an environmental reporter, the founder of the climate newsletter, Heated. That's all coming up after this CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. California homebuilders say they will have to keep buying Canadian lumber to rebuild after recent wildfires, even if tariffs go ahead. Dan Dunmoyer, the president of the California Building Industry Association, says the state simply doesn't have many alternatives. The fires destroyed or damaged 19,000 homes and other structures, and Dunmoyer says the state can't produce local lumber to replace Canadian imports. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says his government would bring in mandatory life sentences for those convicted of trafficking, production, or distribution of more than 40 milligrams of fentanyl. Poilievre likens selling the drug to mass murder. And the seawall at Science World is now closed after cracks were found on the deck. The city says a structural assessment is underway to try and figure out how serious the cracks are. Officials say the deck structures were built for Expo 86 and are nearing their end of useful service. And now the BC forecast. Arctic outflow and extreme cold warnings continue for several areas. On the north coast, sunny and windy this afternoon with a high of 0. Highs around -16 with increasing cloudiness in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a mix of sun and cloud with a high of -17. Highs from -9 to -3 with some flurries and sunshine in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, mainly sunny with a high of -10. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, there's a slight chance of flurries this afternoon with highs around 0. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
I went for a nice walk yesterday in the snow.
It's pretty nice, right?
It was gorgeous.
I mean, it beats sort of gray, wet.
Yeah. Once I got to the
Clear and
slush, I was like, I'm going to turn around. I just love that how it muffles the city sound.
It is very quiet and peaceful.
Yeah, it sure is. Rob, thank you very much.
You bet.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. 12:32 now. Well, one of the late Aga Khan's sons has been named as successor to the spiritual leader for Ismaili Muslims. Prince Rahim Husseini Aga Khan V will inherit the role as the 50th hereditary imam. Ismaili Muslims in BC are remembering the late Aga Khan's community contributions. Now, Early Edition host Stephen Quinn spoke to Ismaili Council spokesperson, former CBC reporter Zara Premji.
Talked a lot about 50 years ago when His Highness obviously found out that his community needed a safe place to go when Idi Amin was sending people out of Uganda. Many were sent to Canada, and that's sort of where that bond was created with former Prime Minister Trudeau at the time, Pierre Trudeau, and that connection was built at the time because it was a connection that was needed, and it was one where Canada opened its arms to our community. The first Ismaili Center in North America, it's in Burnaby. Yeah. That's an incredible thing to note, that this space is right here. And I know that your team was there yesterday speaking to community members. He chose Vancouver for a reason, and I think we've proven that that was a good reason. We've shown that this connection to BC, to Vancouver as a whole, is very strong, and it will continue to be so. I mean, he had really strong ties to former Premier Horgan, his daughter, Princess Sarah, who I was actually named after, and his son, Prince Rahim, were here for a climate accord agreement a few years back.
Welcome back. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Well, the threat of the U.S. tariffs has prompted a lot of talk about provinces diversifying trade partners and strengthening their local economies. Well, Premier David Eby has announced BC is fast-tracking more than a dozen resource projects to reduce reliance on the United States. These projects include critical minerals, mining, hydro, wind, and LNG. And here are a couple of examples. The Mount Milligan gold and copper mine in Fort St. James, a new BC hydro-led transmission line for energy to Northwest BC, and the Cedar LNG natural gas export facility in Kitimat. Energy Minister Adrian Dix said the projects would be prioritized for faster environmental assessment and permitting. Now, earlier this week, Premier David Eby was asked about concerns around BC's climate commitments.
We have shared values and priorities with Americans on a host of different issues. You know, there are governors in the United States right now that are close partners with us in the fight on climate change and addressing issues of environmental protection. I think of Washington State, Oregon, and California. And so the unfortunate piece about this is that through these threats, work that we should be doing together and growing our North American economy and reducing our emissions is compromised. And so for us in British Columbia, we keep our values close to our hearts. We want to protect air and water for our kids. We want to make sure we're fighting climate change, but we're for damn sure going to make sure that our sovereignty is protected in this country and that our families are protected and they can pay the rent and they can buy their groceries. And that is our number one priority, and it always will be.
Well, environmental groups in BC are concerned. Jessica Clogg is Executive Director of West Coast Environmental Law.
To suggest that things like sustainability or Indigenous self-determination, long-term resilience of our environment and communities would be thrown out the window to fast-track potentially risky resource projects is very disturbing.
Well, we're asking you, do you think climate concerns are taking a back seat as Canada deals with the United States? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And what do you make of those priorities that Premier David Eby set out? He said that climate change will always be a concern. Fighting climate change is a concern, but also protecting Canada's sovereignty and ensuring that families get paid. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. My guest is Emily Atkin, an environment reporter in the United States and founder of the climate newsletter Heated, and she joins me from Pennsylvania. Hi, good afternoon.
Hey, how are you?
I am well. Nice to talk to you again, Emily. Listening to BC's premier there, what goes through your mind?
The first thing that goes through my mind is actually the word "but" that he used, as in however, as in we care about protecting kids' environment. We care about the air and water that we drink. However, but we have other concerns that we need to prioritize. And for me as a reporter, that's language that I constantly hear from industries who are, it's just been a theme in my experience that industries, particularly the fossil fuel industry and polluting industries, tend to look for excuses to speed up environmental review, jump over different environmental protection processes in order to speed up development, which in turn speeds up profit. I can't speak to the appropriateness and motivation behind each and every one of these projects that you're talking about. It's just a talking point that I recognize as a reporter who's been covering polluting industries for quite some time.
Yes, and I appreciate your focus on this, and your role in this is as a journalist and a reporter. And I want to also point out that I spoke with our provincial affairs reporter. At this point, it's unclear actually what is newly expedited. Some of these projects had already been sent for assessment. Last December, Energy Minister Adrian Dix announced actually that the province would scrap the need for environmental assessment for new wind energy projects. So some of this may be lumped together to sort of present to British Columbians, here's what the province is doing. So there's the kind of politics in that. Is this something you are hearing more frequently now from politicians amid the election of U.S. President Donald Trump?
Well, actually, what's most interesting about it is that the language of speeding up environmental review process or foregoing it or speeding up permitting processes in response to Trump is exactly the priority and language of the Trump administration in its first couple weeks. Your viewers and listeners might remember that one of the first executive orders that Donald Trump signed when he was in office was called Unleashing American Energy. And, it declared
that drill, baby, drill.
Yeah, which we can talk about more for sure. But, one of the biggest effects, or at least intended effects of this order, because we don't know what will actually be challenged in court, et cetera, is that it attempts to make efficient, as it calls, the permitting approval process for mainly fossil fuel projects. And what that essentially means is skirting or speeding up environmental review processes, which it sounds like is very similar to what is happening in Canada.
My guest is Emily Atkin, environmental reporter and founder of the climate newsletter Heated. She's based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And Peter joins me now from Duncan, and we're asking you, what do you think are of these resource projects that BC Premier David Eby has announced will be expedited, fast-tracked was the word, when it comes to environmental assessment. And so do you think that those climate concerns are put on the back burner as we deal with the Trump administration? Love to hear from you. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And you can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And what do you make of that as a priority then, those priorities? Peter is calling us now from Duncan. Hi, Peter. Welcome.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for letting me on.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to see this. It's nice to see the government kind of get their head out of the sand on resource development. And, I'm currently involved in the mining industry, and I've been waiting 18 months for a permit for a place or property that my dad and I mine. So,
what to you what would have been or would be the risk of not pursuing in an expedited way these projects such as yours?
I still haven't gotten a permit yet, just due to UNDRIP and consultation and backlogs and permitting. So I don't even know what's going on with my permit. But it's nice to see more resource development in our province, because you get outside of the Lower Mainland or the island, and it's getting decimated between everything. And you have all these projects, TMX, Site C wrapping up. You're going to have a lot of people out of work. So,
what's the impact of that of someone like yourself waiting still, Peter?
Oh, it's terrible. Between my dad and I, we have hundreds of thousands of dollars tied up in equipment and permits and stuff, and I can't go out there and make any money. So, and I don't know when I'm going to be able to. So it's financially crippling.
And in relation then to what BC says it's trying to do, trying to diversify, trying to boost the local economy, what difference do you think this sort of fast tracking would make?
I hope it'll make a big difference. You saw that in the provincial election, that it was a very close margin between the Conservatives and the NDP. And I think that people realize that we need, especially the amount of debt the province has and the cost of living, that we need to have resource development. You're never going to get away from that. We're in a province that is very diverse in natural resources, and we have access to many markets, Asia, America, elsewhere. You're never going to get away from natural resource development in BC.
Peter, really good to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Take care. Emily, and you mentioned, these environmental assessment processes do slow down the getting permits and, in a sense, slow down industry development. I guess what are your thoughts on that? On when you talk to people a lot about this, I know, and so how do they weigh? How do they weigh the concerns around climate and also the promise or the potential that natural resources can pose?
I mean, I think it's because of this that it's important to not paint with like such a broad brush. And that's why I'm trying to be careful in the beginning of this by saying, that in general industry language that I hear is let's slow down or skirt environmental review. That's not like in order to spur polluting development. That's not always the case with the reason why permitting decisions are slowed down. At least in the United States, what I hear from people is that there are other just really annoying bureaucratic slowdowns from approvals. And I don't know with this particular caller who called in, what the exact issues were that were preventing him from getting a permit. What I do know is that a lot of times mining projects and oil and gas projects are the ones that I particularly cover. But a lot of times it's because of very serious environmental and public health concerns, particularly about communities that live nearby. And at least in the United States, at least with the many of the decision making that's coming through with the Trump administration, those are the reviews that are attempted to be skirted. Now, at the same time, we need a lot of new permitting and new development, mining, let's say lithium mining, wind and solar, things that, clean cleaner energy sources in order to avert environmental catastrophe too. And that requires a push and pull, right? All energy development is going to have some harmful environmental consequence. And the harmful environmental consequences of continuing just mass fossil fuel development and not replacing it with cleaner energy development is devastating. So permitting is such a difficult line to tread. And I know that a lot of smaller business owners will get, like, who are trying to get into the resource development sector will be in the cracks of that and potentially bad situation like your caller.
And you make a good point around the broad brush that we often tackle this discussion with. Before I let you go, I'm interested in how you're approaching climate in 2025. What is coverage of the environment looking like for you?
Well, coverage of the environment, it's hard to not be overwhelmed by the sheer number of stories and lanes that one could pick as an environmental reporter. And I know the activist community is also very feeling the same way. What lane do I choose? And for me, it's very important to pick a lane and make a little bit of progress on it every single day. The most experienced journalists and organizers that I know are not. They're not freaking out about each little thing that they hear every single day. They're in their lanes, doing their thing every day. For me, I've picked really 3 lanes that I think are important. One is just tracking the influence of industry money in government. That's extremely important in the U.S. government. The fossil fuel industry in particular has bought a lot of capture of the United States government at this point. They spent almost $500 million influencing the elections overall through lobbying and campaign donations. The other one is just tracking big business climate spending and climate action, because, in an administration that's very hostile to even the reality of climate change, I think for regular people, that what their dollar is doing, the way they choose to spend their money becomes that much more important. And then the third thing is really just focusing on reporting on activism that is moving the needle, that is making a difference, and really showing people the power of other people to make a change.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you. Emily Atkin is an environment reporter based in Philadelphia and founder of the Heated Climate newsletter. Asking you about the plan by BC, the provincial government, to fast track some resource projects, and they do include some wind projects as well. We were talking about the kinds of projects that they are putting through or fast tracking through the environmental assessment, and some of them are going. There's one LNG project, a couple of LNG projects. There's wind as well as hydro projects, and mining and critical minerals as well. You can go to cbc.ca/BC for a list on our website. That will be in our web story there. Asking you if you think that means that climate is being put on the back burner as we deal with the Trump administration. 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and pound 690 on your cell phone. Rick is calling from Victoria. Hi, Rick. Welcome. What are your thoughts on fast-tracking resource projects?
Hey, how's it going today? I have to agree totally with what Emily says from the United States. The United States has put Canada and it's British Columbia, and David Eby as our premier is doing a yeoman's job. I wouldn't say have to fast track as much as the environmental assessments need to be expedited, and the people doing them, I'm sure, are working hard, but they're just going to have to work harder. We didn't ask for this. This was given to us by President Trump, and that's what we have to do. One of my big concerns, I think those items you just mentioned, there's an array of different things that are going to happen. But this TMX line that goes to Vancouver, one of the environmental assessments, and I worked in the shipyard for years, I don't really want to see anything happen to the water with an oil spill or anything, et cetera, et cetera. But this oil was supposed to be exported. It wasn't supposed to be going to the United States, and it's going to the United States. So we need to look at that immediately on an environmental assessment and, get these ships, as much as some of us don't like it, and make sure that it's safe as possible and get this export going, because we got to turn that oil outward. It can no longer go south. I mean, that's just a fact that we've been given. And I don't believe this 30-day tariff limit is anything at all. I think Donald Trump could wake up tomorrow morning and change that.
You think it's coming anyway? Yeah.
I think it could be coming sooner than we think.
Sooner than we think. Rick, thank you very much for the call. And so looking at safety, but again, that diversification, and to be fair, Energy Minister Adrian Dix said that the projects would be prioritized for faster environmental assessment. But he also said it's critically important we move through these stages of the process, not to take away from standards, but to ensure that these projects happen in the fastest possible way. So that from Energy Minister Adrian Dix. Asking you what you think of where the climate crisis falls when it comes to this response to Donald Trump's tariff threats. And we hear from provincial governments saying we're going to boost our local economy. As part of that, Premier David Eby says they're going to fast track the process for 18 resource projects. Tony is on the line in Vancouver. Hi, Tony. What are your thoughts on that? Hi, Tony. Are you there? Okay, I think we have lost Tony. Let's go to Brian at Dawson Creek. Speaking of resource communities. Hi, Brian.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for calling us. And so what are your thoughts on the fast tracking in terms of the assessment process for these resource projects?
We should have done it 10 years ago. We started our oil and gas play here in Dawson Creek in 2004. Just about a half a mile in any direction from Dawson Creek and 50 miles north, south, east, and west, including Alberta, has oil facilities on it. We've never had an incident. We've never had an oil spill on a pipeline. Our coal mines are waiting for permits.
Is that because of a robust process, though? Is that because of the robust assessment process?
No. The robust process is 5 years of waiting and delaying resource development. Canada should wake up and find out that just selling our oil and gas to the United States isn't the way to go. We're lucky we got LNG going. But what happened to Northern Gateway? BC stomped that down. We can't ship oil to the East Coast. We'd rather buy it from the Arabs or Venezuela. We got it all mixed up here.
So at the same time, we see the impacts of climate change. We saw, the devastating fires in Los Angeles. What should be done when it comes to those concerns? They are still there, Brian.
We can worry about climate change, and we can handle climate change as well as resource development. It just has to be done common sense wise with faster permitting and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That other fellow that was on there talking about waiting for permits, why should a man have to wait a year and a half to get a permit to dig a hole in the ground?
And what has been the impact of that delay or that length of time, that wait on the community in Dawson Creek?
Well, what it does is it makes people take their money and go somewhere else where they can do resource development faster. I live actually in Batesville, Alberta, which is right beside Dawson Creek. I come to Dawson Creek every morning and I meet 100 vehicles going to Alberta to go to work. And all those people live in Dawson Creek. They're rolling in Alberta and we're standing around here waiting for permits.
Really good to hear from you. Thank you so much. Glad you called.
Thank you.
Take care. Jody is our final caller now in Prince George. Your thoughts on fast-tracking assessment processes for resource projects, Jody? Thanks for calling.
Well, we just honestly haven't built this is a history of dealing with climate change borne out here. We haven't built a resilient economy that's based on something other than ravaging our landscape and destroying the climate. And now, with the slightest bit of political pressure, when we have to bow immediately.
Is it slight? Is it slight? I mean, they're talking about, Canada as a 51st state.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not slight, but we get some political pressure and we bow to it instead of having, I mean, if we had already invested in a green economy in a way that would help us have thriving and sustainable communities and a thriving economy that's not based on fossil fuels. If we had done that, then we perhaps wouldn't be in this situation where we have to rejig everything.
Yeah.
And we'd have a little bit more wiggle room to perhaps accelerate some things if we had to.
Jody, thank you very much for the call. Really good to hear from you as well in Prince George. I have 30 seconds, but Jessica, go ahead, please.
Well, I'm very concerned about this because I think that what's happening is that the environmental safety is getting lost, but also democratic process is getting lost. So at a certain point, how will we be different from Trump if the government dictates, says that we can reopen Indigenous rights settlements that we have established, if we ignore UNDRIP, and if we violate environmental law?
Okay, Jessica, I have to, my apologies, I have to wrap it up there, but thank you very much. Glad we got you on. Lots of calls. You can email us, bctoday@cbc.ca, on anything you hear on the program. That is it for our show. Thank you so much to all of our callers. Really glad to hear all of your thoughts and your perspectives in both of our half hours. You can always email us again, bctoday@cbc.ca. You can listen to the show again. Just go to the CBC Listen app, or you can watch us on demand on YouTube. Just search for CBC British Columbia. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for joining us today. Stay warm. Have a good afternoon. We'll talk tomorrow.